Hey everyone, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world, including this one, and all in one place. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts, we'll dive into one of the strangest, most secretive, and least understood episodes of the American Revolution. A story of treachery, conspiracy, and fear at the very birth of the United States. This is the story of the Hickey Plot of 1776, the first known conspiracy against George Washington, uncovered at the very moment he was fighting to hold together an army, a city, and a revolution.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
A quick word from our sponsors. This day in history. On December 20th, 1803, the United States formally took control of the Louisiana Territory in a ceremony in New Orleans, completing the Louisiana Purchase, the largest land deal in American history. Overnight, the nation doubled in size. On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. Its leaders declared that the election of Abraham Lincoln threatened slavery and states' rights, and within weeks, 6 more southern states followed. What happened on this day set the nation on a direct path toward the Civil War. Story of the day. It was the summer of 1776, and the American Revolution hung by a thread. Washington's Continental Army, still untested and poorly supplied, had recently driven the British from Boston. Now they had marched south to New York City, expecting a counterattack. New York was vital, the gateway to the Hudson River, the artery that connected New England to the rest of the colonies. Whoever controlled it would control the war's momentum. But the situation was dire. Washington's army was exhausted, underfed, and uncertain. The men lived in crowded camps, surrounded by loyalists who spied for the crown. The city itself was divided. Half the population of New York was still loyal to King George, and the other half weary of rebellion. And looming just beyond the harbor was the greatest armada the British Empire had ever assembled. More than 400 ships and 30,000 troops, preparing to crush the rebellion once and for all. In that tense, paranoid atmosphere, rumors began to spread through the American camp. Whispers of betrayal, bribery, and a plot to assassinate General George Washington. New York in 1776 was a nest of espionage. Loyalists, British agents, and opportunists all jostled for position. The provincial governor, William Tryon, had fled to a British warship anchored in the harbor, but still directed a covert intelligence network within the city. Tryon and his agents recruited sympathizers from every level of society, merchants, servants, and soldiers alike. They offered gold, land, and protection to anyone willing to betray the rebel cause. Among those drawn into this underground web were several men from Washington's own ranks, members of the Commander-in-Chief's Guard, the elite unit responsible for protecting Washington himself. And at the center of it all was a man named Thomas Hickey. Thomas Hickey wasn't just any soldier. He was one of Washington's personal guards. Born in Ireland, Hickey had served in the British Army before joining the Continental Forces. He was handsome, charismatic, and by all accounts, a skilled soldier. But he also had a reckless streak, a fondness for gambling, women, and drink. When Hickey enlisted in the Commander-in-Chief's Guard in the early 1776, he seemed to have found redemption. But not long after, his old habits resurfaced. While stationed in New York, Hickey was arrested, not for treason, but for counterfeiting continental currency. During his imprisonment, he began to talk, perhaps too freely. Fellow prisoners claimed that Hickey boasted of being part of a secret loyalist network, one that planned to sabotage the Continental Army from within, assassinate George Washington, and open the city gates to the British once they arrived. The plot, he claimed, reached all the way up to the high-ranking officials and wealthy loyalist citizens, even to the royal governor himself. When word of Hickey's boasts reached military authorities, an investigation began. Washington's intelligence chief, William Dewar, began questioning suspects, tracing connections between soldiers, merchants, and loyalist agents. What emerged was a tangled web, vague, incomplete, but alarming enough to cause panic. The supposed conspiracy, sometimes called the New York Conspiracy or the Hickey Plot, involved multiple layers: counterfeiting money to undermine the Army's pay, poisoning food supplies, and most dramatically, an attempt on Washington's life. One informant claimed that Hickey and others had been bribed to desert their posts during the British invasion, and that Washington himself might be captured or killed in the chaos. As more arrests followed, the scope of the alleged plot grew. Some accused New York's mayor, David Matthews, of financing the scheme with British gold. Others hinted at involvement from Governor Tryon's agents aboard ships in the harbor. Washington's staff struggled to separate rumor from fact, but one thing was certain: the commander-in-chief's guard, the very men entrusted with Washington's safety, had been infiltrated. George Washington was not a man easily shaken, but the Hickey affair deeply disturbed him. He had long feared treachery. The fledgling army was held together by a fragile loyalty and very thin rations. Desertions were common, pay was low, and political intrigue swirled in every camp. Now, the thought that one of his own guards might betray him, perhaps even strike him down, struck at the heart of his command. Washington acted decisively. He ordered the commander-in-chief's guard disbanded and reconstituted, vetting every member personally. He launched a quiet but sweeping investigation, questioning suspects and reviewing evidence. And though the full details remain murky, one man, Thomas Hickey, would be made an example. On June 26, 1776, a court-martial convened in New York City to try Thomas Hickey for mutiny, sedition, and treachery. The evidence was largely circumstantial: testimony from prisoners, rumors of meetings with loyalists, and Hickey's own incriminating boasts. But the atmosphere left no room for doubt. The army was on the brink of collapse, the British fleet was approaching, and morale teetered on a knife's edge. To maintain discipline and unity, Washington needed to send a message. The court found Hickey guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to death by hanging, and Washington approved the verdict. On June 28, 1776, just days before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, thousands of soldiers were ordered to assemble on the Common, near modern-day City Hall Park in Manhattan. Washington wanted every regiment present to witness what happens when loyalty turns to betrayal. Thomas Hickey, dressed in rags, was led to the gallows. Accounts from the day describe him as pale but defiant, insisting that he was no traitor even as the noose was placed around his neck. A hush fell over the crowd as the trapdoor opened. Hickey dropped, the first soldier of the Continental Army executed for treason. The message was unmistakable: betrayal would not be tolerated, even within the ranks of liberty. In his general orders that evening, Washington wrote that Hickey's fate should be, and I quote, "a warning to every soldier in the army to avoid those crimes which are so destructive to the freedom of their country." End quote. So what exactly was the Hickey plot? Well, historians still debate whether there was a real, organized conspiracy or whether paranoia magnified a few careless words into a national scandal. The evidence, even at the time, was very thin. No documents, weapons, or plans were ever recovered. The alleged loyalist leaders, including Mayor Matthews, were arrested, but later released without trial. It is possible the entire affair was just exaggerated, a convenient way for Washington to tighten discipline and rally his men in a moment of crisis. Yet even if the conspiracy was more rumor than reality, it did reflect the real fear that haunted the revolution. The sense that at any moment, the fragile cause could crumble from within. The colonies were not united. For every patriot, there was a loyalist, and for every declaration of liberty, a whisper of betrayal. The Hickey plot became the perfect cautionary tale, a story of danger lurking not across the ocean, but in one's own camp. Within weeks of Hickey's execution, history took its next great turn. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. But in New York, freedom was still uncertain. Just days later, the British fleet arrived, and within months, Washington's army suffered devastating defeats at Long Island and Kips Bay. New York City fell to the British and would remain occupied for the rest of the war. In history news, a few weeks ago, history regained one of its lost voices. Researchers confirmed that remains of Eliza Monroe Hay, the eldest daughter of President James Monroe, have been repatriated from Paris and laid to rest at her family's tomb in Richmond, Virginia. For nearly 2 centuries, Eliza slept in an unmarked grave in a Paris cemetery, largely forgotten and dismissed by history as a runaway aristocratic daughter. But new archival discoveries, a pair of desperate letters she wrote in 1839, revealed a different story. She wasn't a socialite drifting abroad by choice. Instead, she'd been defrauded of her inheritance, stranded in foreign poverty, and desperately trying to secure a future for her grandchildren. Her reburial, conducted on October 23, 2025, at Hollywood Cemetery near her father's tomb, wasn't just a symbolic act, it was a restoration of dignity, you might say. An entire community of volunteers, historians, and distant descendants came together under a privately funded project to bring Eliza home and right a historical wrong. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. If you have any questions or comments, you can shoot me an email at peter@historyshortspodcast.com or visit www.historyshortspodcast.com or look for the History Shorts Podcast on Facebook, X, and Patreon. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.